Imagine the following scene. Your 8-year-old daughter wakes up in the middle of the night, his eyes wide as if he had seen the impossible, and in a child who does not look like a child, murmuring that he was present when God handed over the 10 Commandments. Was it just a girl's fertile imagination? Or a living fragment of a millennium memory, echoing in the dried mountains of Guerrero, where the wind carries the smell of mesquites and the sacred aroma of the copal? The Hernandez family could never predict that their quiet life would become the most impressive record of ancestral memory ever documented. It was a night of October 2019. The rain fell with fury over the zinc roofs of the small town of Tlapa. While Esperanza prepared coffee from Alia in Adobe's kitchen, her husband, Joaquin, fixed an old engine in the weak light of a hanging lamp. Her only daughter, Paloma, slept in the wooden bed carved by the great-grandfather, until something woke her up at dawn. It was not the storm thunder that shook Sierra Madre del Sur. It was not the barking of the wandering dogs. It was something much deeper, a force that made her get out of the trembling bed, her eyes open in shock, as if her time had touched her. "Mother," Paloma whispered from the door, her white camcision floating in the dimness as an appearance. "Mom, I need to tell you something very important." Esperanza dropped the wooden spoon in the boiling coffee. There was something in the voice of the daughter who froze her to her bones. It was not the fear of a children's nightmare. It was the certainty of those who witnessed something that no child should know. "What is it, my angel?" Paloma approached slowly, his bare feet barely making noise on the cold floor. Her brown eyes, usually full of mischief, now shone with an intensity that did not match her age. "I was there when God came down from heaven," he said with a calm that the soul broke. "I saw when he handed the tablets to Moses on the hill that spit fire." The silence took over the kitchen, dense like standing water. Only the bubbling of the coffee was listened to and the rain beating on the roof. Esperanza felt the floor shake under her feet. "What are you talking about, my daughter?" It was there, mother, in the middle of the terrified crowd. The mountain trembled like a furious animal, with flames everywhere and a cloud so dark that nothing was seen. Paloma climbed into a wooden chair, settling like an adult about to reveal a serious secret. Then a voice so powerful that we all fell to the ground. Everyone cried with fear, lest Moses. He rose, even though he knew it was forbidden. Esperanza felt a shiver through her spine. His family was Catholic, but not especially devoted. Paloma attended the catechism, yes, but had never shown so much interest in biblical stories, and certainly never spoken so many details that they sounded real. "Where did you hear this story, my love?" "I didn't hear, mother. I lived. I was there." The girl closed her eyes, and her voice was distant, as if she revoked a scene that only she could see. "We were hungry, thirsty. We had been walking for days in the desert. My feet hurt because the sandals were torn, and my tunic, dirty with sand." Esperanza sat in front of her daughter, her heart beating like a ritual drum. "Tunic?" "Yes, a rough, brown tunic, with a cord in the waist. We all wore the same, men, women, children. We were all equal in that desert." Paloma opened her eyes and looked at her mother with an ancestral sadness. But when God spoke, hunger, thirst, and fear disappeared. There was only that voice that penetrated to the bones, saying very important things. "What did he say, my daughter?" The girl hesitated, and then, to the absolute horror of Esperanza, began to speak of an unknown, guttural language, as old as the desert stones. "Anocha Adona y Elohicha," pronounced Paloma perfectly. Esperanza almost passed out. His daughter, who had never left Guerrero, who could barely read in Spanish, had just recited the first commandment in ancient Hebrew. Worst of all, he had said how he remembered he was there when those words were first said in history. That dawn, while the storm punished the mountains, Esperanza learned that her life would never be the same. Her daughter not only remembered one of the most sacred moments of humanity, she was there when the divine touched the earth. In the following days, the family tried to keep the routine. Ranza made tortillas in the mud with the clay, washed clothes in the stone courtyard, took Paloma to the school. But with every look at the daughter, the words in Hebrew echoed in his mind like bell trees. Joaquin, a practical man, faced his wife's account with skepticism. Child invents a lot, Esperanza, he said as he cleaned a gear of a gear. Perhaps I had seen something on TV or heard Father Ramon in the church. But Hernandez television only took 3 channels, none with religious programs at the time Paloma watched. And Father Ramon, elderly and speaking a Spanish mixed with Nahuatl, had never used Hebrew in his masses. On Friday morning, while Paloma spent beans, I fired on a hot tortilla, let out a phrase that made Hope to choke with the coffee. Mom, why don't we eat manna anymore? Manna? What is this, my love? It was like some white cookies, sweet like Mel. They fell from the sky every morning in the desert, but we had to reap early, before the sun born, if they melted. Paloma chewed thoughtfully. We couldn't keep it for the next day, because they were full of animals. Only on Friday we could keep it for Saturday, because it was a holy day. Joaquin, who read news on his broken cell phone, almost no sign, raised his eyes with strange expression. Where do you take these things from? It's not things, Father. That's what happened when I lived before, with another name, another family. And what was your name? Esperanza's heart was hitting so strong that she felt her blood throb in the temples. I called me. Paloma frowned, as I did when I tried to solve the school's math problems, biting the lower lip with a concentration that did not match its 8 years. Oh yes. His eyes suddenly illuminated. I called me Miriam. Like the sister of Moses. The fork slipped from the hands of Esperanza, beating the hand-painted ceramic plate with a metallic snap that echoed like a shot in the stillness in the morning. Moses' sister. Yes, but I wasn't his real sister, Paloma corrected, as if it were obvious. It only had the same name. There were many Miriam in the camp. It was a very common name. She took a sip of hot chocolate, leaving a foam mustache that cleaned away with the linen napkin embroidered by her grandmother. Miriam was the one who took care of the children when the mothers had to work. It was also the one who knew the most beautiful songs, continued, his eyes lost in some memory that did not belong to that kitchen. Songs to thank God. What songs? Joaquin asked, now completely absorbed, the forgotten cell phone on the table. Without warning, Paloma began to have a melody that none of them had ever heard. It was a strange, hypnotic corner that smelled the hot sand in forgotten centuries. The notes hanged in the morning air as a smoke of incense, involving everything in a sacred mist. Then, to her parents' amazement, she began to sing words in that mysterious language that she had used days before. Shurat Hayam. Shurat Hayam. His voice was sweet, but he carried a longing for a child. The melody was too beautiful to be human, the kind that chant after seeing miracles and tragedies, after crossing seas that open in two, after walking 40 years through a desert in search of a land that only exists in the promise. When it ended, the silence filled the kitchen like a heavy blessing. What does this song mean, my angel? Esperanza whispered, his shaking hands on the table. It's the sea song, Paloma replied, smiling at the innocence of those who still believe in fairy tales. The song we sang when we crossed the Red Sea and the waters closed over Pharaoh's soldiers. His eyes, however, were not from a child. There was something old in them, something that has already seen the world born and die. It was the most beautiful and most terrible day of my life, he continued, as if talking about any afternoon in the park. See the water get up like mountains on both sides, and we walk along the bottom of the sea like land. He led his hands to the window, where the sun illuminated the Nepal and bougainvilleas, and the fish of the water tank shone like silver coins. There were so many fish attached to the walls of water. And shells, and plants that moved as if they danced. Everything shone with a golden light. Joaquin and Esperanza looked at each other, speechless. Your daughter described to one of the most famous miracles in the Bible as a trip to the fair. Paloma, Joaquin began, the careful voice, as if fearful she disintegrated to the touch. Do you remember something else from those times? The girl sat again, but her face was now dark. I remember the desert. Very desert. And the heat that burned my feet, even with sandals. But the worst thing was thirst, Father, the thirst. His eyes were filled with tears. And when people did bad things, God got very angry. Once men said the golden calf was better than him, and then. And there? Esperanza pressed, his heart in his throat. The earth opened and swallowed the liars, Paloma whispered, hugging himself as if he felt the cold wind of the desert in that hot kitchen. And fell from the sky. And a lot of poisonous snakes appeared. She trembled. So when God spoke of the hill, everyone was so afraid. Because we knew he could do terrible things if we were disobedient. That afternoon, after leaving Paloma at school, Esperanza did something she postponed for days. He walked to the church of St. Michael the Archangel, a colonial temple of pink stone that dominated the central square of Tlapa, his towers pointing to a sky that suddenly seemed much closer. I needed answers. And if her daughter had actually been present at one of the most sacred moments in history, perhaps a man of God could help her understand what was happening. Because what most terrified her was not Paloma to remember past lives. It was the accuracy of those reports, the details that only those who were there could know, and that absolute certainty in the voice of an 8-year-old who spoke of God as who speaks of a neighbor who finds every day on the way to the bakery. Father Ramon Gonzalez was 72 years old and, in half a century of priesthood, had seen everything. He had widowed, blessed harvests, united couples and had the extreme utterance to dying. But when Esperanza Hernandez sat in front of him in the dark wood confessional, who smelled the beeswax and copal, and told him what happened to her daughter, the old priest felt something she had not experienced for decades, a pure perplexity chill. Father, I don't know if I'm crazy or if my daughter is. Possesso, Esperanza whispered through the grid, the words coming out like smoke between her fingers. She says things that a child can't know. Sing in tongues that do not exist in our people. He speaks of God as if he had known him in person. Father Ramon adjusted in the leather chair spent, his hands intertwined over the black accent. Daughter, children have a lot of imagination. Maybe she saw something on television, or she sang me the sea psalm on perfect Hebrew. And when I asked what it meant, he explained every verse as if he had been there when Moses divided the waters. The following silence was so dense that it seemed possible to cut it with a knife. Hebrew. Hebrew, Father Esperanza repeated, as if the words burned his tongue. My daughter, who can barely read in Spanish, who never left Guerrero, who has never seen a religious book beyond the catechism. That afternoon, Father Ramon did something he had not done for years. He withdrew from his private library an exhausting exemplary of history of the Hebrew people, who had studied in the seminary, and walked to the Hernandez house. He found Joaquin in the backyard, fixing a bicycle in the shadow of an avocado foot, while Paloma played near, building something on earth with pebbles and twigs. Good afternoon, Joaquin. Is Paloma? Of course, Father. There it is. But when the priest approached to see what the girl did, she felt the blood freezing. It was not a castle, nor a little house like any child would do. It was a perfect recreation of a desert camp. Tents aligned with accurate rows, a larger central area, and in the middle of all, a rectangular structure that Father Ramon recognized instantly. Paloma, what is that? What are you doing? The girl lifted her face, the dirty cheeks, her eyes shining with an intensity that did not belong to that age. It's our camp, priest. The Israelites' camp when we were in the Sinai desert, explained, pointing each part with the accuracy of an architect. Here are the tents of the 12 tribes. Each tribe had its special place, and this one, it touched the rectangular structure, is the tabernacle, where we kept the Ark of the Covenant. Father Ramon knelt beside the child, studying the construction. The arrangement was exact. The details coincided perfectly with the descriptions of the Exodus. And how do you know it was like this? He asked, his voice hoarse. The child crossed his arms, as if the question was obvious. Very carefully, priest. Her eyes shone with the intensity of those who revived each gesture. First, the oldest man in the family, usually my father, Elazar, chose the best quarter of the flock. They had to be male, without defect, a year. Then we took him to the courtyard of the tabernacle at the sunset of the 14th day of Nisan. She paused, as if hearing distant voices. All men gathered. My father was holding the animal as the priest, sometimes it was Aaron himself, cut his throat with a slogan. The blood was collected in clay bowls and then spread in the gates with a branch of hisopo. Father Torres felt the air mist. Those details were not in any catechesis manual. They were ritualistic practices described only in ancient rabbinic texts and in the Dead Sea Rolls. And the fire? He asked, his voice shaking. How did they come on it? Paloma frowned, as if the question was naive. It did not come on, priest. The fire was sacred. She pointed to an imaginary corner of the room, as if she saw the flames dancing before her. It came from the altar of holocausts, which never went out. My father told me that when Moses climbed to Sinai, God himself lit that fire, and we the Levites were responsible for keeping him alive. If he went out, it was a sign that God was angry. He lowered his voice, as if shared a secret. Once 2 men from the Reuben tribe let the fire go out of negligence. They died at the same time. The floor opened and swallowed them. She shuddered. I saw. They had young children. Father Ramon made the sign of the cross, instinctive. That was not the sweetened narrative of children's books. It was the Old Testament's rawness, with the accuracy of an eyewitness. Father Torres, in turn, opened his Hebrew Bible with slightly shaking hands. He flipped to Exodus 27, where the law of perpetual fire was described in a few dry verses. Nothing there was talking about the punishment of the negligent. The detail only appeared in oral traditions and in Talmudic comments. Paloma. Father Torres leaned forward, his elbows on his knees like a scholar in front of a lost manuscript. You said you helped your mother make the tabernacle curtains. How were they made? The girl's fingers outlined invisible forms in the air, as if they still held the wires. First, we gathered the thinnest linen of Jericho's plains. My mother was spinning him until she was soft as a cloud. Then we had the wires. The bold blue came from the Hilazon snail, which was only on the beaches near Tyre, the purple, of an even rarer mollusk, and the red, from the roots of a plant that grew in the valleys of Jordan. She closed her eyes, as if she aspired the smell of those dyes. Gold was beaten on blades so thin that they looked like autumn leaves, and then we sewed everything with pure gold threads, in patterns that God himself had taught Bezalel. He suddenly opened his eyes, fixing them on the priests. Do you know, priests? Those drawings were not only beautiful, had meaning. The curtains embroidered in the curtains looked at each other, because they represented the angels who kept their way back to Eden. And the pomegranates in the tabernacle bars? There were 7 on each side, because 7 is the creation number. Father Torres felt a knot in his throat. Those symbols, the intertwined cherubim, the pomegranates as emblems of divine fertility, were mystical interpretations that only appeared in medieval Kabbalistic texts. No one taught them to children. No one even mentioned them in homilies. And the ark, Father Ramon could not contain the question. Did you see her? Paloma lowered his head. When he spoke again, his voice was a whisper. Yes. But it was not like the drawings the Lord has in the book. She pointed to the illustration in the Bible of Father Torres, where the ark appeared as a golden chest with angels in the lids. It was simpler. And more terrible. Her fingers were confused in the fabric of the dress. It was made of acacia wood, covered with gold inside and outside. But gold did not shine like that of the crowns of kings. It was a dark gold, almost as if it had been burned by the fire of God. And the cherubim, she swallowed hard. They were not chubby and smiling as in the paintings. They had extended wings, so large that they touched in the middle, and their faces. Paloma closed their eyes tightly. They didn't look at the ark. They looked down, as if they could not stand to see what was inside. A heavy silence filled the room. Father Torres knew everyone knew that the ark contained the boards of the law, the Aaron staff and a vase with manna. But the girl's description was not of an object. It was from a presence. And when they transported her. Father Ramon didn't finish the sentence. Paloma trembled. No one could touch her. Only the Levites, and yet only with the rods and the rings, because God had said that whoever touched it would die. Once a man named Uzzah reached out to hold the ark when the oxen stumbled. She covered her face with her hands. I saw when he fell. His body was black, like coal, and the smell. The girl started to cry softly. My mother covered my eyes, but I still hear the screams. Father Torres felt the cold sweat drip down his back. That story, Uzzah's death, was in 2 Samuel 6. But the biblical text did not describe how he died. He did not speak of the smell, neither body color, nor screams. Only an eyewitness could know those details. And for the first time in his scholar's life, Father Miguel Ángel Torres was afraid. Because it was not facing an imaginative child. He was facing a soul that had seen the face of God and had survived to tell. It was not an ordinary wind, those who blow in the warm afternoons of Guerrero and raise dust from the ways. It was something alive, something that breathed. Father Torres felt the air in the living room, as if the girl's memory were contaminating the space with the weight of those moments. Paloma ran his tongue through his dry lips, his fingers intertwined hard enough to make the joints white. It was as if the hill itself is exhaling, he whispered, his eyes still closed, his voice now hoarse, as if he dragged stones. A smell of fire, but not fire that burns wood. Of fire that speaks. That chooses. Father Torres held the pen so hard that his nodes from his fingers were pale. He knew the scriptures. He knew Shekinah's theology, the divine glory that descended about the tabernacle. But hearing her described by a child by a witness was like being hit by lightning in the temple. So, he tried to say, but his throat was dry. Paloma suddenly opened her eyes, and there was no longer the innocence of an 8-year-old girl. There was something old. Something that had seen the face of the embodied and survived to tell. Then he came, he said, and his voice shivered not fear, but of such deep reverence that hurt. Not like a man. Not as nothing we can draw or sculpt. It was, she gestured with her hands, as if trying to shape the air. It was as if the whole sky folded to fit there, in those few meters of stone. And the sound. She fell silent. Father Torres did not breathe. The sound, Paloma repeated, now looking at his own hands, as if waiting to find them burned. It was like 1,000 voices speaking at the same time, but all saying the same thing. And they were not words, priest. It was not our words. It was as if God was thinking aloud, and we can only understand what our hearts already knew. The silence that followed was so heavy that Father Torres felt the sweat dripping between his shoulder blades. And Moses? He asked, the voice almost inaudible. Paloma smiled a sad smile, who remembers a friend who left a long time ago. Moses climbed. Alone. We saw the light involve him, as if he were being fabric inside it. And when he went down. She swallowed hard, her face shone. Not like the sun. As a full moon on snow. We couldn't look straight. My mother of before covered my eyes with my hands, but I saw by the fingers. He carried 2 stones. They were not heavy. Not like that. They were heavy because, she paused, looking for the words, because they had God inside them. Father Torres felt the floor oscillate. It was not possible. It was not rational. But there was Paloma, with the dilated pupils, the breath accelerated, the body all tense as a RCO ready to shoot, and he knew, with a certainty that he surpassed the logic, that she was telling the truth. Did you play on the boards? He asked, his voice broken. Paloma shook his head, the brown curls dancing with the movement. Only Moses could play. If we got close, the skin, she ran her fingers through the forearm, as if she felt an old burn, tingled. Like when you touch those strands of light that come out of the lamps, only inside. But once, his eyes filled with tears again, a man, one of ours, didn't believe it. He said it was just history. That Moses was crazy. He reached out. Father Torres already knew the end. But I needed to hear. And? He whispered. Paloma closed his eyes, and a tear ran down his cheek. He shouted, said his voice a thread. It was not fire. It was not lightning. It was as if something inside it had been turned off. He fell. And when we looked, there was nothing more. Just ashes. White ashes. Like salt. Father Torres leaned back in his chair, shaking hands. He had studied theology for decades. There had been debugged verses, analyzed historical contexts, discussed miracles with skeptical and faithful. But never had come across something like that. Paloma had not yet ended. "Father," he said, and his voice was a child again, but his eyes were from someone who had seen the abyss, and the abyss had seen her back. "When Moses descended with the tablets, we knew nothing would be the same. Because God had not only spoken. He had promised. And when God promises..." She didn't have to finish the sentence. Father Torres looked at the window, where Guerrero's sun fell over the mountains like a cloak of fire. Something inside him, something that had been carefully built over years of study, doubt, and faith, he said. And for the first time in his life, he was afraid. Not from hell. Not of the demon. Not of death. He was afraid of facing a truth so great that his mind would not be able to contain it. The air thickened inside the jeep, as if the desert itself had contained the breath. Paloma turned slowly to Dr. Al-Rashid, his eyes those eyes that had already seen fire columns sharing the night, fixed us with a certainty that he did not admit replica. "It wasn't here." The girl's voice was not that of a child correcting adults. It was that of someone who had stepped on that land when she was still shaking under the feet of a living God. Dr. Al-Rashid, a man who had devoted decades to map every inch of Sinai in search of traces of the Exodus, felt something freeze in his spine. It was no doubt. It was the first tremor of a conviction that threatened to collapse everything he thought he knew. "How are you sure?" he asked, although he knew the answer would leave him without ground. Paloma stretched his thin arm through the open window, pointing to the horizon where the mountains rose like old scars on the skin of the earth. "Because there," he said, indicating a chain of distant peaks, almost imperceptible under the warm heat, "is where the sea opened. And there," her finger drew an invisible line in the air, as if she drew a map that she could only see, "is where we camp after we passed." Moses had pits dig into Rephidim, but the water was bitter, so God showed him a piece of wood to throw inside. It was there that the Amalekites attacked us, and Moses had to lift his hands with the stick as Joshua fought. The silence that followed was so dense that even the Jeep engine seemed to have diminished in volume. Dr. Sarah, archaeologist Israeli who had accompanied the expedition with professional skepticism, opened her notebook with lightly trembled. "Rephidim is almost 100 kilometers from the traditional route we are following." "I know," Paloma replied, as if he was talking about the way between school and his house. "But you are wrong. The hill is not the one who everyone thinks." She turned to Father Torres, and for the first time since they had left Mexico, his eyes shone with something that was not memory but urgency. "Father, did you bring the map I drew?" The pale priest took a crumpled roll from his pocket where, with childish but precise strokes, points were marked that no biblical atlas recorded. "Here," Paloma touched a circle in the center of the paper, "this is where God came down." "It is not the muse. It's another. Higher. More." She hesitated, looking for the word. "Horest." Dr. Al-Rashid felt the weight of his own breath. "If this is true." "True," Paloma cut, without arrogance, only with the simplicity of who knows that the earth under his feet keeps older secrets than doubt. "And if we go now, we will still arrive before dusk." Jeep stopped. No one spoke. No one needed. Because there, in the midst of that desert who had witnessed miracles and betrayals, everyone understood the same thing. They were no longer hunting a legend. They were following a witness. Dr. Al-Rashid squeezed his fingers on the wheel until we got white. "What do you mean, Paloma?" His voice, usually firm as the desert granite, was now shaking with an urgency that was no doubt, but something deeper, the first tremor of a man who feels the floor of reason opens under his feet. "I say we didn't pass by when we left Egypt," she answered, her eyes fixed on the horizon as if they read an invisible map drawn in the air. "We went to the south more. There was a place with palm trees and fresh water, and then a mountain that looked like a finger pointing to the sky." Dr. Sarah frozen. Its fingers, which hitherto leafed yellowed maps over time, stopped on the open page of the Exodus. "Describe this place with the palm trees." "It was a beautiful oasis," Paloma said, the soft voice like the breeze that was still blowing on those dunes for 3 millennia. 12 water wells. 70 palm trees. There we rested several days because we were very tired. The two archaeologists exchanged a look. It was not a look of skepticism or hope, it was the electric silence of those who suddenly recognize God's signature in detail that science should never have confirmed. The description coincides exactly with Elmam, muttered Dr. Sarah, the trembling fingers over verse 27 of chapter 15. And are you sure the way was through the south? Yes. Paloma nodded, the low eyelashes as if revived every step. We were following the sea, but on this side. We crossed where the sea was very narrow, full of rocks. Dr. Al-Rashid adjusted the GPS with hands that, for the first time in decades, not only trusted the numbers. Let's follow Paloma's nominations. In the next 3 hours, the girl guided the group for routes that did not exist on any tourist map or military files. He pointed to rock formations as if they were old known. We camp when the sand burned his feet, there, where the stone looks like a kneeling camel, we lost 3 sheep. Dry wadis described where, according to her, the children played to hide from the winds, and mountains he had seen from the entrance of his tent. The one there, with the white scar, was where Moses climbed to speak to God. And then, when the sun was already bleeding on the horizon, they saw him. Mount Sinai rose before them not like a mountain, but as a verdict. His twin peaks ripped the okay blue sky, a red granite fortress that did not reflect the light absorbed it, as if he kept in his bowels the fire of too old revelation to be forgotten. Paloma was still. It is, he whispered, and the words came out like an oath. It is my sacred mount. Tears ran down his face as his small but firm finger traced the plant of an invisible camp in the air. The tents went from that large rock to that hill, and the tabernacle was right there, where this shadow is now. Dr. Al-Rashid took the measurement equipment with shaking hands. According to biblical calculations, a camp of 600,000 men, more their families, would require exactly the space that Paloma had just delimited. Paloma, called Dr. Sarah, the voice broken by an emotion that was not scientific. Can you show me where your tent was? The girl ran. Not as a child exploring unknown terrain, but like whoever returns home after a long trip. He dodged the rocks with the accuracy of those who know every protrusion, every slit, every secret that the desert hides. Here, he said, kneeling in the sand. Here was my little house. His small fingers began to dig. In centimeters below the surface, they touched something hard. Mommy, come. I found something. The adults ran. Among the fingers of Paloma, dirty millennial land, was a fragment of ceramic, ancient, fragile, decorated with patterns that Dr. Sarah recognized instantly as she passed the magnifying glass over them. It is only impossible, it murmured. Late Bronze period ceramics. Exactly the time of the Exodus. And then Dr. Al-Rashid shouted. In some hands from there, his own effort had unearthed not only more fragments, but a metal object corroded by time but unmistakable, a Hebrew amulet, the type used by Levites' women. Paloma caught him with a reverence that did not belong to that was. It's mine, he said, caressing the grooves of corrosion. It was from my mother from before, but she gave me when I became a woman. Has the recorded priestly blessing. And there was, under the patina of time, the still readable Hebrew characters, the first words of Numbers 6 verse 24, the Lord bless you and keep you. Are there more things buried here? Asked Dr. Al-Rashid, the hoarse voice. Yes. Paloma pointed to the east. There is buried a pot where we kept manna for the emergency days. And beyond, his eyes shone with a memory that was not yours, but lived in it, there are bones of the animals we sacrificed. In the time that followed, science bowed before the supernatural. Each dirt shovel revealed a proof, leftovers in the exact places where Paloma remembered the community kitchens, bronze tool fragments, bones of lambs with ritualistic marks of sacrifice, identical to those described in the Levitic. But the definitive confirmation came when she led them to a small cave on the mountain slope. Here I hid the day God descended to the mount, said my voice, a thread of ancestral fear. I was so afraid that I stuck here with other children. At the bottom of the cave, recorded on the stone with primitive tools, an old Hebrew inscription awaited them. On the day Adonai spoke since Mount Santo, year 40 of liberation. Dr. Al-Rashid and Dr. Sarah looked at each other. 40 years after the Exodus. Exactly the moment when, according to the scriptures, Moses died and Israel prepared to enter the promised land. Paloma, archaeologist Musulmano asked, his voice broken for the first time in his career. Who wrote this? The girl studied the inscription with eyes that shone not with tears, but with a light that came from far beyond those 8 years of life. It was me, answered. When he was old and knew he would soon die. I wanted it to be written forever that day God came down here, so that no one would ever forget. And then, as the sun drowned behind Sinai and the first stars lit in the desert sky, the world's most skeptical scientists knew they were facing something that could not be explained, neither refuted nor reduced to theories. A girl from Guerrero, Mexico, just 8, had just guided them with surgical precision to the places where she had lived 3 millennia before. And they were not distorted memories, no childish fantasies, they were physical, irrefutable proofs, as if time itself had bent to witness. Some stories are so important that they transcend death to reach us. Who could imagine that the most striking proof would come in the form of a Mexican child whose eyes kept memories that the oldest books only suggested? Dr. Sarah, once a bastion of academic skepticism, has abandoned her certainties to lead a global initiative that seeks to unravel other cases of ancestral memory in children around the world because, after Paloma, the impossible stopped being. Father Miguel Angel Torres has transformed his testimony into a book that shook the world, When Heavens Open, Paloma's Testimony, an editorial phenomenon translated into 12 languages, where each page seems to whisper that the border between the sacred and the human is thinner than we suppon. Already Father Ramon, now retired, passes his afternoons in Tlapa Square, among cups of coffee and unbelieving looks, telling the story of the girl who spoke to God as who talks to a dear grandfather. People ask me if I believe in reincarnation, he says, with a tired but enlightened smile. I answer I don't know. But I believe in Paloma. And I believe God chooses ways to prove that our logic will never be able to decipher. The artifacts of the Sinai camp, discovered thanks to the accurate indications of an 8-year-old child, today rest at the Jerusalem Biblical Archaeology Museum. Thousands of visitors crowd before the ceramic fragments, the Levite amulet and the registration in Hebrew. Archaic relics that, without Paloma's voice, would still be lost under the sand of time. But the most moving truth is not in the windows or scientific articles. It is in the Hernandez adobe house, where a humble family keeps, inside a rusty can of the traces of a journey that challenged all the laws of reason, faded photographs of the desert, a handful of sand from Mount Sinai and a small stone that Paloma collected from the exact place where, 3 millennia before, he had witnessed the divine. Do you miss Miriam? Esperanza asked her daughter one night as her hands fell points on the cloth under the silver light of the moon. Paloma lifted her eyes, serene like a lake at dawn. I don't miss, Mom. Because she's still here. And he touched his own chest, as if there was a presence there that time could not erase. Now we are one, like when you mix 2 paints and a new color is born, which carries a little of each one. And what is it like to have such ancient memories? Asked Esperanza, his voice embargoed. Paloma put the embroidery aside and looked at the mountains of Guerrero, silent under the robe of stars. It's like being a bridge, Mom. A bridge between her time and the time he is. As if God had sent me to remind me that he never went, it only changed the way of speaking. Before, he spoke with thunder and lightning. Today, here, his eyes shone with a wisdom that did not belong to his age. Today, he speaks through children who remembered the impossible. Fathers who write books and families who cross deserts because a girl said to them, I've been here, 3,000 years ago. She smiled, and in that gesture there was something eternal. I think God always said like this, Mom. Only we sometimes forget how to hear. Paloma's case is still dissected by psychologists, theologians and archaeologists, reopening questions that science would rather ignore. What is consciousness? How does memory survive death? What if what we call soul is just the name we give what time cannot erase? But for the Hernandez, the theories are secondary. What matters is that they were chosen to witness something that redefined the meaning of being alive. Every year on October 15th, the birthday of that dawn where Paloma woke up talking about thunder and fire, the family lights a candle on the altar of her house. It is not a candle of mourning, but of gratitude. Gratitude for being the guardians of a testimony that the world could not explain. Gratitude for finding out that God's love is so vast that it transcends you in tombs. Gratitude for understanding that some remember are so sacred that the soul carries them from one life to another, as a beam that never goes out. And as she calls her dance in Adobe's kitchen, illuminating faded photographs and plaster saints, Paloma sometimes sings a old melody. A song he learned when his name was Miriam and his house, a tent under the infinite sky of the desert. A song that speaks of the day God descended to walk among men and handed them the words that would change the story forever. Because there are testimonies so powerful that even death cannot shut up. There are such sacred moments that the soul keeps them as eternal jewelry. And there are such true stories that they find impossible ways to get to us. The story of Paloma Hernandez is one of them, a reminder that we live in a much deeper and more mysterious universe than our reason dare to admit. And that sometimes this mystery knocks on our door in the form of a child who wakes up, at dawn, to tell us that he was present on the day the divine decided to reveal himself to humanity. If this story has resonated on you, share it with those who need to remember that miracles not only belong to the past. And tell us, have you ever felt that it carried memories that could not be yours? Your voice may be the next testimony to transform our understanding of life, death, and what exists beyond them.